About a month and a half ago, Ubisoft came under fire from the larger video game community, as they so often like to do, for the abrupt and disappointing announcement of their plans to delist Assassin's Creed Liberation from Steam, effective September 1st. The initial response by consumers was assumption that it was the worst case scenario, that once the game is gone, not only would no one be able to purchase new copies, but existing owners wouldn't be able to re-download the game. Thankfully, this ended up not being true, but it's still a pretty annoying situation, because the game's downloadable content is still going to be delisted and rendered unplayable alongside any other online elements. To add insult to injury, Liberation was on sale for 75% off only days before this announcement during the Steam summer sale, so people got fooled into buying a game that would lose its DLC and all online functionalities in less than 2 months. This was all part of Ubisoft's greater plan to simply end online support for a handful of their older games, but it sparked up a conversation that's been popping up again and again over the last few years every time a noteworthy game is taken out of commission on the digital market. The downsides of digital gaming and the importance of physical media. With the rise of high-speed internet access for consumers getting off the ground in the early to mid-2000s, one of the biggest things people looked forward to was the convenience it offered. Not only could a faster internet connection let you play games online more smoothly, but it also opened the door for drastic quality of life improvements for both developers and players. For the former, it meant offering new content and major updates for their games without needing to spend the money printing new physical copies that include all of it. Once internet access became a utility that developers and publishers could easily assume we all had, they no longer saw the need to put expansions and DLC on discs anymore, saving them hundreds of thousands, maybe even millions of dollars in printing and manufacturing costs. But it didn't stop at just DLC. With the convenience of the internet, a lot of publishers grew complacent, lazy, and stingy. We've all noticed by now that almost every publisher in the world has thrown out physical manuals for their games to pinch pennies on producing physical copies. But in the recent years, we've began to see more and more AAA games take up larger amounts of space on the discs they ship on. And we've reached the point where, more often than not, those discs no longer contain the full game and instead only a portion of it, forcing players to access the internet and download the lion's share of the game they thought they would have ready on the disc, because publishers would rather force this inconvenience on players than pay for the manufacturing of a second installation disc. Call of Duty has been constantly guilty of this since World War II in 2017. Since then, none of their games have released with the campaign, multiplayer, and zombies all on the disc. In fact, the series has come under fire for being unrepentantly wasteful of storage space by forcing people to also download Warzone in order to even play Modern Warfare 2019 or Cold War. Forza Horizon 5 for the Xbox Series is also guilty, with its physical disc containing only 20 gigabytes of data and requiring the other 80 gigabytes to be downloaded. And don't even get me started on Switch games. It feels like almost every AAA game released on the Switch has only part of the game on the cartridge. Credit where credit is due. Thankfully, some publishers do pull through on this with some of their games and actually do print that second installation disc, such as Rockstar with Red Dead Redemption 2, CDPR with Cyberpunk 2077, Square Enix with Final Fantasy VII Remake, and others. But as the years have passed, more and more content that should be on the disc you buy is being stored on a server somewhere, forcing you to download the rest of the game, and this has completely undermined the entire purpose of owning a game physically to begin with. And worse still, consumers actively make excuses for this, saying that this is just how things are now, or this is how technology advances. I don't know about you, but completely dismantling the primary reason for why physical is preferable in the first place does not strike me as an advancement. It sounds more like regression. Publishers actively avoiding spending the money to put the content on the disc is only part of the issue here. The other part is digital distribution also failing to provide long-term access, because when something is available only digitally, such as DLC, then delisting them effectively makes them extinct from commerce and only available through piracy. Let me give you an example. In the last year or so, I've grown to become a fan of the Forza Horizon series. I played Horizon 4 on my PC, then bought 5 for my Xbox Series X once I bought the console. I also picked up the Hot Wheels expansion for it the day it came out, and I loved it. I probably should have reviewed it actually. I played the first Forza Horizon title way back when it came out, but I still hadn't touched 2 or 3, so I decided to go back and fix that. However, there's a bit of a problem, and it's a problem with the entire series. Forza Horizon games are only available for 4 years. After 4 years, they are unceremoniously delisted from all digital storefronts and new physical copies are no longer produced. This is because of expiring vehicle manufacturer licenses. 4 years. That's almost half the length of a console generation and less than half of the time it takes for almost any other kind of AAA game to reach end of life. Every time a Forza Horizon game comes out, you have 4 years to buy it and every piece of DLC, or you lose the chance to get them. Now, of course, you can still buy used physical copies of the base game, which is what I did for Horizon 3. But what about DLC? I never owned Horizon 3 and therefore never bought any DLC before they were delisted. How can I acquire them now? The answer is, I can't. At least not legally. If I want to play the Hot Wheels expansion for Forza Horizon 3 today, I need to pirate the game. I have to. It is literally the only way for me or anyone who didn't already own it to access it now. It doesn't matter that I have money and the willingness to spend it on the expansion. Expired licenses have dictated that I don't get to access it anymore. And since that content was also never committed to any physical copies, I can't circulate any money into the used game economy either. Piracy is the only answer. It's frustrating to say the least, and it also touches on how licenses can interfere with a game's longevity and available content too. Ace Combat games also go in and out of availability due to licenses with aircraft manufacturers, and Grand Theft Auto games, including older ones, get updates that remove music from radio stations. At varying levels of severity, licenses negatively impact the content available to us. It's a difficult issue to solve because sometimes these licenses cost a significant portion of a game's budget, in which case the shortness of their availability isn't really the developer or publisher's fault. But either way, these expired licenses and the inevitable delistings they cause are a bane on video game ownership. All of these talking points more or less lead me to the very simple message of buy games physically, if you can, assuming the full game is actually on that disc. I know, not all games can be preserved by the simple fact you own them on disc, such as any game that's online only. And even single-player games might have important internet-required features that'll go down the drain if their support is shut down, like co-op, or messages and bloodstains in Souls games. And I know not everyone has enough physical space in their own home to store numerous shelves. I get it. But physical ownership is a key defense against numerous things. First off, you actually own the game as opposed to a license to access it, and the publisher or platform holder can't just snatch that access away whenever they please. Don't forget how close Sony was to shutting down the PS3 and Vita stores until Backlash stopped them. It's extremely rare for a delisted game to not be re-downloadable for anyone who already owns it, but sometimes it does happen, and it never feels good when it does. Obviously, when you buy a game, there's no telling that you'll actually want to replay it 20 years from now. But the only way to ensure that the option is available to you is if you have your own physical copy. Second, having the 1.0 version of a game on disk is a safety net for when future updates remove or alter content in ways you don't like, such as Grand Theft Auto 4 getting songs removed from the radio, or perhaps even the frame rate getting capped. There are a few PS4 games that, if left unupdated from their 1.0 disc version, can actually run at 60 FPS on the PS5. Pretty interesting. Thirdly, there's reselling. Even if you are crippled in regard to space in your own home for games, buying physical copies can still be beneficial by simply being resold. Buy a game at full price, play it, beat it, or don't if you dislike it, then sell it for fairly close to the price you paid. It's a much smarter investment than buying a digital copy of a game you end up hating, but you've sunk too many hours into it to be allowed to get a refund. In fact, some online stores don't allow refunds at all. Physical copies are also ideal for people who just don't have good internet. It's either too slow for a big game to be downloaded in a reasonable amount of time, or your internet could be severely capped. I understand this because I've been there for years. I live in a very rural area, and I was stuck with brutally capped satellite internet until I finally got Starlink installed earlier this year. It was fucking awful. Any game that was over 50 gigabytes in size was out of the question for downloading. I hated it. And the latency was so bad that playing games online with it was simply a pipe dream. I had to use my phone's mobile hotspot feature to get an internet connection that was just barely good enough for me to play Final Fantasy XIV on. There are millions of households around the United States that still have mediocre connections like this, and damn near all of them are also rural. I know I go on a lot about piracy and piracy-adjacent topics on this channel. I have at least 3 other videos on these subjects. But it's a discussion I take really seriously. I don't want to be forced to pirate a game that I wish to buy. I want to own it legally. But sometimes the issue of availability forces my hand to sail the 7 seas, and I do it without regret. Because having access to the game taken away from me sure as shit was not a decision that I made. If there's any company that wishes to combat piracy, then they need to do it by solving their own availability problems first, because that's where the value of piracy truly lies. I guess my biggest motivator for making this specific video, though, is the fact that I can't buy the fucking Hot Wheels expansion for Forza Horizon 3. What a piss off. This concludes my video on the frustrations of digital gaming. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you around.